How's it brewing, everybody? Coffee Bean here. Finally back after a very long break to see if it is possible to beat Final Fantasy IV with only Cecil. Now, I have seen someone kind of attempt the same challenge, but they did it in the Pixel Remastered version. This isn't to say that it was easier or harder, it's just that there are some quality of life differences between the games, and I haven't seen anyone do it in the 3D version. So today we will be giving that an attempt. And yes, we will be playing the game on hard. This is a challenge after all, and we want it to be actually challenging. So let's hop into it. So how do we go about getting rid of our teammates? Well, something that is, I believe, a bit more unique to the Final Fantasy franchise is the fact that in the older games, you could often do friendly fire. I guess that's the best way of putting it. Thanks to status effects like sleep and confusion, which were typically canceled out by taking a physical attack, they thought that it would be good that you as a player would have the choice to attack your own team to knock them out of it or to wake them up. Now, we are going to use that and sort of abuse that being able to attack our own teammate to, when need be, take them out ourselves. Sometimes the enemy will actually prioritize attacking them over Cecil, who we do want to stay alive, and that helps us out tremendously because we can keep up our defense without having to take a bunch of damage and have to use resources to heal because they did a bunch of damage to us while we were trying to take out our own teammates. So there's a little bit of RNG that can come into play, but the biggest thing is that we will never attack the enemy by choice over taking out our own teammates first. Now, granted, there will be some times where the game will revive our teammates and we definitely have to heal and we just have no option rather to heal than to take out our own teammates. But the main thing being that we will not attack the enemy until our team is dead. Now, we will have a few instances where the game puts us into sort of a fighting cutscene is what I would say it is, where we have no control over the character, but they are taking actions. I'll say that that will not be held against us, like this section with Tella. You can see that the meter moves on its own. We're not pressing anything. We're not doing anything. He fights by himself. We have another section which only happens once where you are put into a fight with Edward and we have to beat this fight. I don't think that this should say that the challenge is null and void because it is story based. It has to happen. You have to win the fight. I tried losing the fight. I tried, not doing anything, and it would not let me through. So I'm going to say that this is going to be a pass, but I'll let you guys decide on whether or not it should really be allowed. But this is the only time where I feel like we really got close to having to seriously break the rules of this challenge. Now, I won't say that the start of the game is too easy. Personally, I think that it was a really good learning experience, and it really opens up the rest of the game as you get new cast members and new available abilities. It shows you what you can do and what you should really expect in difficulty, for the most part. Literally, as I was just saying, the game starts out relatively easy, but the game is also trying to tell you and show you and teach you about different characters and how to pair them together and how to have them work together in unison. Well, when you throw all of that out the window and you're trying to beat the game with a single character, it kind of throws that whole teamwork thing out the window. And yeah, in this fight where we're supposed to take out multiple enemies at once, doing that by ourselves is relatively tough. And since they're also not one-shots, or even for that matter, two-shots, we were having quite the difficulty. Adding self-destruct on top of that did not make things easier. So I threw myself at this time and time again, trying to make sure that my resource management was as good as it could get. And every single time, I couldn't get exactly what I wanted. So I did go and do a bit of grinding to get some levels, and surprise, surprise, sometimes really weak enemies give a whole lot of experience. Which again is, I think, the game trying to tell you that it's not just tough enemies that are important. Petrification only is bad if you get oh my goodness, 2100? I should have just been fighting the birds. So after that little bit of grinding, all of my problems were solved. Or so I thought. Okay, wait. Let me just try it one more time. I think I know what I need to do. This time, we've got it for sure. Alright. I think it's time for our secret weapon. Spider Silk is probably the most busted item in this game. It's a single item that hits multiple enemies on one use, and it slows them down. That might not seem like a whole lot, but when this whole game's system isn't based on a back and forth such like Pokemon, but it is all timed, sometimes you can get anywhere from 2 to 3 extra moves in between your enemy's attacks. And it was all that I needed to get through this fight. Augments are special items that can be picked up and only used once to teach one of your characters a special move or ability. We have augments like Auto Potion and Item Lore available to us right now. Item Lore is really important because it doubles the potency of any item that we use, and seeing that we have no access to magic, it is going to save us on money buying potions, and it will also heal us way more than we really need to heal sometimes. So it's just a good all-around ability to have. We also have Counter available to us, but there is a limit to how many abilities you can have equipped at once. Thankfully, we have 2 open slots and we only have the 2 abilities that we need, Item Lore and Counter. So as far as augments and our team is concerned right now, we are A-okay. As far as our team so far, apparently none of us have ever been on a boat before, and we thought that it was a great idea to all stand around the edge of the ship. That resulted in me losing my whole team. Thankfully, I'm trying to do this without them, so maybe that's a good thing for me. Keeps it nice and simple. I can just go and do my own thing. Hang in there, Cecil. Unfortunately, right after getting rid of our last losing our last teammates, the game thinks that we need more people on our team. So it rewards us with 2 new wizards, Palom and Porom, and brings Telebat. We kind of need them for their magic, but unfortunately we can't use them, so we are in a bit of a predicament. As we are fighting a bunch of zombies and the undead, they're really susceptible to elemental attacks and a bit less to physical damage. So we were supposed to use a lot more magic against them. Thankfully, again, Cecil is very tanky, and we were able to, with the help of both Counter and Item Lore, we were able to out damage our attackers, and we could also out heal the damage that they did to us. In this boss battle, he would hit us with slow, but thanks to our spider silk, we could also hit him with slow. So the battle essentially evened out and we were able to get the win. After the zombie in a potato sack fell off the mountain, we were able to proceed to the inside of the mountain. I'm actually not entirely sure where we went. It's like a separate plane or something. Either way, we were able to fight ourselves, or rather, block against ourselves, and realize that we are not meant to be a dark knight, but rather we are a paladin. Now, with being the paladin, we gain access to different abilities, we lose darkness, but the biggest thing about this is that we lose all of our levels. What's not so great about that is the fact that we are supposed to be fighting on our own. Also, with our set parameters, we have to knock out our teammates before we can attack our enemies. So I have to not only get into a fight and win that fight, but I also have to find a way to get rid of all of my teammates before the enemy takes me out with the little bit of HP and defense that I have. Thankfully, due to some of the grinding that we did before, I was able to purchase some equipment early to beef up our defense, and with our abilities such as item lore and counter, we would have a bit more hope in fighting back. So I went ahead and equipped some of that armor. As you can see, also feel like I should point out that with being a paladin, we have access to different equipment than we did as a dark knight. A paladin can use armors that are more attuned with mages. So in certain cases, we will be able to beef up our magic defense or our evasive capabilities rather than just beefing up our physical defense. But in this section, I really only needed to get through one fight. Once I got through a single fight, I knew that I would have enough experience to level up a good deal, and from there, it would just be easy pickings. So I went ahead, and as I was putting on my equipment, I equipped stuff that had higher evasion rather than just defense, so that when I got into these fights, knowing that I couldn't take too many hits regardless, if I was just able to evade, I would be able to get out of those same situations, but without having to pay any extra cost. So even just after one fight, our damage went up tremendously. We went from dealing only around 12 or so damage to an enemy to in the low to mid hundreds. And it still took a little bit of time to get rid of our opponents, but time was something I had to spare. Just knowing that we were able to continue moving through the challenge and that we weren't stuck here due to not being able to level up was a huge deal. And I also could have run way further back into the map to a lower leveled area and have fought enemies there, but this was just a method of getting through that way faster. And with that, we were good to keep moving on. The game loves to shuffle in and out the characters that are in your team because there really are a lot of different available people to play as. And that's great and all, but it also wants to utilize those characters and their special features. In this cave, we're not allowed to use any of our regular metal armor or our sword. Right now we have a little fire shard that does about 5 attack. I think at this point in the game we had weapons that were dealing between 40 or 60 attack. So yes, these fights would take a ridiculous amount of time. I used a lot of resources healing through these fights between both magic and regular items. In getting through them, we got experience for it, but not all that much. So a lot of the fights, it was just a matter of, how do I survive? How can I live a little longer? I even tried to test on whether or not I could actually equip some of my armor and such, and you get like a little lightning symbol by the character showing that that it was not able to be equipped. And so because of that, and not wanting to spend hours and hours and hours in this cave, I decided to run and run and run. I've never felt so helpless in a game before. This section made me think, am I really able to finish this game? I'm just in one cave that seems a little bit difficult, and yet my spirit is almost broken. Do I have what it takes to push to the end? After running time and time and time again, and occasionally being one shot by being petrified, or being infinitely stun locked by wizards, I really don't know what they were thinking when I decided to do a challenge with a single character and they made these enemies. Against a single person, there's nothing that can be done there. But finally, I'd made it to the crystal chamber to take out the boss in this horrendous cave. Again, just hoping that I would be able to use my equipment sooner than later. I tried to see if my sword would work inside of this room, and I was wrong. I got into the fight thinking, okay, I just have to watch my health, just see what moves he uses, and then I was done. He'd beaten me in a single blow. But thanks to Edward and his amazing musical talent, we were not only able to get back up after being defeated, but we were finally able to re-equip all of our good equipment. And I'm gonna be honest, as long as I had all of the best equipment that I could have at that point in the game, things were relatively smooth. I still had to use some strategy, like putting shell and protect on myself, making sure that I didn't ever overcommit to dealing damage and not healing as an option from time to time. But in the long run of things, Cecil was pretty strong and capable on his own. Maybe the rest of this challenge won't be so bad as that single cave.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Final Fantasy IV is always looking to, as I've said time and time again, they're always looking to add another character into your party. You're always switching in and out of who's available and who isn't available in your party. And characters who have been there in the past are no exception. We get Rydia back into our party just in time to get rid of her and continue on our solo quest. Thankfully, with her return, it's only reviving Cecil or removing the paralysis from Cecil. And she doesn't revive anyone else, which tremendously helped us this time around, because then we only had to knock her out really fast and then get back to our 1-2 combo of healing and attacking, healing and attacking. And after a couple attacks, we finally whittled down his health enough to finish the fight. Now, I won't lie, that took me about 20 minutes or so. Moving on to one of the most interesting fights in the game is the Doctor and his monster. Isn't that how they typically refer to it? Or no, I think it's Frankenstein and his monster. Regardless, this fight is really interesting because it has a secret feature tied around defeating both enemies close to the same time. And it's kind of hard to explain, but I'll do my best to do so in this video. So the Doctor doesn't have a whole lot of health, and Frankenstein, as I'll call him, does not have a whole lot, but a little bit more than the Doctor. So what you're supposed to do is essentially balance out the damage between the two by dealing a little more damage to the monster, Frankenstein, and just an attack here and there to the Doctor. If you don't line it up properly, Frankenstein will explode. And you could possibly survive it. It's just really hard to do so while also dealing damage to both enemies and trying to keep track of how much damage the explosion does each time, because it's based on how much health the enemy has from what I can tell. But Frankenstein will only self-destruct if you take out the Doctor first. If you take out Frankenstein first, the Doctor controls the monster, and then you fight them as a sort of combined unit up until the Doctor explodes. Now, I'm thinking that maybe there's a certain point where you could defend and possibly live through it all, but instead I just kind of count it and calculate it, how many attacks I could do on each opponent and when the self-destruct or the Doctor taking over Frankenstein occurred, and it only happened on their turn. So if I spaced out my attacks and hit them in between their turn slots, I found that I could take them both out before they could attack. But regardless of how you deal with finishing that fight, the Doctor always turns into this sort of cyborg and does reversal gas, which in a sense changes anything that would deal damage to healing and anything that would heal to dealing damage. So I chucked an elixir at him. And then I just waited. Eventually he used the move again, reverse things back to normal, and I was able to take a swing at him and finish out the boss fight. It's really odd, and I'm sure I explained this fight absolutely horrendously, but if you guys are interested in the game, I highly recommend going and like really just messing around with all of the different available things in that fight. Final Fantasy IV definitely felt like one of those games where they were just constantly like giving you so many people just to turn around and be like, all right, how can we get rid of them? We'd have already lost Tella, Palom, and Porum. We lost Rydia earlier, Edward's gone, and now Sid. And so it's just like, okay, wait, but was there no other way for him to get out of this situation? Like, I understand like what he was holding, like the grenade or whatnot. I'm sure that it was, you know, pretty important that it was in the right positioning when it went off, but could he have not just like thrown it over the edge of the ship? because there's definitely no need for accuracy with this thing. And you guys will see in just a second. Like, he should have had no concern about that thing missing. It wouldn't have missed. Like, there's just no chance. I thought that section in the cave where I was running away from everything was gonna be what really broke me in this challenge, until I remembered the wall. Now, I hadn't said it before, but I've played through Final Fantasy IV a couple times before on the DS, but that was years ago. So there are a few bosses that I forgot, and on top of that, some of these bosses really weren't difficult unless you were fighting them on your own. That boss, or one of those bosses, is the wall. You can see that he moves across the ground just a little bit after a certain amount of time. He will move 15 times, and at the end of that 15, you are done. So I had to deal however much health he had before he reached me. And it seemed simple enough, you know. Cecil was relatively strong at this point. But I made a mistake. Where I left off, there were no enemies that I could fight. There were no encounters that I could run into. And on top of that, my level was already relatively high anyway, and I think my strength was maxed out at this point. So any damage that I could do, I was already doing just about as much as I could. There was no other weapon I could go and acquire before coming back and trying to fight this. I was all on my own. Whatever I had in my inventory, and whatever wits I could come up with to take him down. So in that first fight, I just went to see, okay, I was wondering if there was any sign of, is he close to being beaten? I didn't find any. I was like, okay, that's fine. The sword I was using is called the Avenger. It puts you in a state known as Berserk, and it boosts your attack, but at the expense of, you can only attack, and the decision of who you're attacking is not up to you. So essentially you're trading attack for, or you're trading your choice of attack for extra attack, and on top of that you're also trading out accuracy. The sword was just really bad accuracy. And so after doing a lot of testing, I realized that there are a few things that I could do. I could spider silk the wall, and that would slow it down, and it would give me more moves in between each time it moved. Unfortunately, I was really stuck on thinking that the Avenger sword was going to be the solution to this, but things really weren't that simple. Unfortunately, I didn't think to change my strategies or my ways of going about this for about an hour or so. I kept trying and trying with the Avenger sword, thinking, this is how I get max damage. If I'm not getting max damage from each attack, then other strategies must be wrong. I'd boost, or I'd slow down the wall, switch to Avenger, and I'm like, as long as every single attack hits, I should be fast enough to win the fight. And that really wasn't the case, but I was much, much too stubborn to think of anything else to get around beating the wall. Until eventually I caved and I equipped the move Cry. Since counter wouldn't really do anything, and item lore was kind of pointless in this battle since I didn't really need to heal, I equipped Cry and Adrenaline. Adrenaline, if I ever landed a crit, the attack would be doubled. In Cry, I was able to drop the wall's defense. I believe it drops by half. So with that, I started testing that out and realizing, okay, without using Avenger, I'm dealing really high damage and I'm not having to trade that out for lower accuracy, because at the point that I was at the start of trying to get through this fight, if I ever missed a single attack, I would not have been able to beat the wall. But even with all of this information, it still was not enough to beat the wall until I thought of one last thing. So I go ahead and I use Spider Silk. I slow the wall down because that absolutely have to. I use an item called Hermes Sandals, which gives me haste so that I can attack faster each time. I use Cry to drop its defense, and then instead of switching to Avengers, I use an item that gives me Berserk. And through using that item and not switching my weapon, I was able to get that attack boost without having to drop my accuracy. And it's crazy to me to think that before I thought that the more status items and moves I have to use, the worse my damage output will be. But once I saw everything working and put in motion, I realized I was doing a lot of damage much faster than I ever was before. And that is one of the major reasons why you always have to be careful of your resource management and understanding that holding on to items is never a bad thing until you quite literally hit a wall. So with another victory under my belt, I went ahead and switched back to my regular abilities that I had equipped, item lore and counter. And with a sigh of relief, I was on my way. We're getting pretty close to the end of the game. We went up to the moon. Don't ask me how we got up here, but we had to go and recruit some help so that we could go back down to Earth and stop the Colossal Titan. Now, the moon isn't the worst place to be in the game, but it does have a lot of enemies that will deal status effects to you, such as poison, or silence, or petrification, so on and so forth. And so it's not a bad idea to be leveling up and getting as strong as we can. So as we are getting ready to go back down to Earth to take care of this Titan, I do want to say that the enemies, as I've also just said before, as they're getting tougher, they're really geared more towards the team as a whole. The game doesn't want you to rely on a single character. It wants you to have to use other characters to get you through fights. It gives you opponents that have gimmicks so that when you get into those fights, you'll go, okay, I have this party member like Edge, the ninja. He can hit multiple enemies at once. He would be really good. Rydia has her summonings. Those would also be really great for taking out multiple opponents. It's stuff like that that really kind of pushes you to utilize your team as a whole and to not play the game with a single character. However, for me, I don't have that luxury, especially when it comes to magic, and I'll come back to that in just a second. But for now, let's get through the introduction with the Elite Four. Now these are all bosses that we have fought before, and they each have a special gimmick. Now the issue with that is that we will have to deal with all of these gimmicks, not necessarily all at once, but all back to back. So if there was any sort of special equipment that we had in place for one boss rather than another, we no longer are able to do that. We have armor that will have fire damage, we have armor that would have lightning damage or ice damage, and we don't have the option of switching out said armor. Now we can switch out which swords we're using, or which sword we're using, and the shield that we have equipped. But beyond that, there's nothing else that we can do. And then on top of that, they also revived everyone on our team. And having a team of 5, that's 4 turns. If the enemy doesn't hit any of them, 4 turns that we lose to taking out our own team. And as you can see, sometimes they'll hit us and we counter. I'm not considering that against the rules as long as we never counter an enemy and the fight ends. So if our teammates never get experience, I think it's okay for the counter to land, because it's honestly out of our control. But we go ahead and we take care of our teammates, and I'm like, okay, this should be fine. If you guys remember when I was talking about this boss before, he has a move that will hit us with slow or curse. I never really found out which one, how they were different, so to speak. But that was something that we had to be mindful of. And then we also have, oh, I forgot about this. I'll get back to explaining the bosses in just a minute. I remembered that there is an item that, in exchange for dealing massive fire damage, you self-destruct. And I just completely missed it. So yeah, we had to start that whole fight over. So we get back to our zombie boss. And he hits us with the move that makes us slow. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I was a little annoyed at this point just because I'd made such a simple mistake after getting through a couple of these bosses and going, I had been doing so well with managing all of my items and my health and everything. And I was just barely making it through that boss battle. And so I was like, knowing that I was close to the end of the fight, I think it made it even harder to see myself lose. But thankfully, these bosses, second time around, just remember the gimmicks and you'll be fine. With the water turtle, Squirtle, he also kind of looks like Venom. With him, his big thing is he will hit you with slow. We just do our typical hit them with slow as well. And he'll go into his shell, and if you don't deal enough damage in time, he will heal himself. So you have to out damage his healing. He is weak to lightning, so when the water surges, you just wail him with lightning then, and you are fine. That's why it's important to always kind of keep certain elemental items ready and available, so that when these situations and instances come up, we have what we need to take care of these bosses. Now, the wind boss, the one that I kind of knocked myself out on before, she cannot be hit with physical attacks, which would be a bigger deal if we didn't have item lore and if we didn't make sure that we kept so many elemental items on hand. Because we had so many, it would never get to the point where we wouldn't be able to win. I just had to make sure that I didn't hit bomb core, instead I hit bomb crank. And with that, we took care of her relatively easy. Again, still a little upset that I blew myself up. But then we get down to the fire boss. Rupert Cant, I believe was his name. And he's a fun one. When his cape is open, if you hit him with, I believe it's just anything elemental except for fire. He heals from fire. But like if you hit him with ice, it deals damage. If you hit him with the sword, it deals damage. All of that deals damage. You do have to out damage him. He's another one where you're kind of in a hurry, where he'll use Inferno, deals damage to you, heals himself. So you have to make sure that you out damage him in this fight, which was relatively easy, just as long as we used ice. So that part was not super tough to deal with. When he closed his cape, if you hit him, even if it were with ice, I believe it was just any element or any attack at that point, he would heal off of it. I might be forgetting another special gimmick that he had when the cape was closed on some way that you could deal damage, but it didn't really matter because we were already doing way more than enough against him that we didn't have to worry too much about how much he was healing or even how much we healed him at times. But even with just the regular attack, I didn't realize till the end of the fight that I could have just been swinging and dealing just as much damage as with the ice attack moves that I was using. So at the end, I was like, oh, okay, I'll just take a swing. But with that, we finish our Elite Four and are almost immediately thrown into another boss fight with the CPU. Besides the giant laser cannon that it would do, it really was a one-trick pony. The left node would hit you with lasers, the right node would heal the CPU, and then the CPU itself would reflect. Reflect only really works if you hit it with magic, which we weren't doing anyway, so that didn't really hurt us at all. I went ahead and used Spider Silk to slow down the nodes, and then I used Haste to make sure that I could take out this left node before it could use the laser barrage and deal too much damage to me. After taking out the left, it doesn't actually come back at all. I think it only works that way if you take out the left and then the right node. The CPU should restore both of them. But because I took out the left, didn't take out the right, and just attacked the CPU, it was a fairly easy fight. I was honestly expecting a bit more, but it was really straightforward and just relatively easy. So let's talk a bit about the enemies and also level expectancy. So when characters join your team, they're typically a bit lower than what your level should be, but they're close enough that they will survive and be able to get the job done until you level them up. So when Kane joined our team again, he was level 53. Now, Cecil is level 99 at this point, and even still, he is struggling against these enemies. Now, it didn't seem like they did a whole lot of damage there, but for me, understanding that I was not able to counter them at this point because they were hitting with magic, and I wasn't able to one-shot them either, meant that I would have to land 6 attacks without being killed. Now, I could heal myself, but at most I was only healing for around 2,000 using my cure magic, or even using items. So unless I used an elixir, I would not be able to deal enough damage fast enough and take so little damage to actually survive to be able to take them out. Even when it came to enemies like Behemoth, I found myself needing to use Spider Silk as if it were a real boss to take it down. And while Behemoth is kind of supposed to be like a miniature boss, I really felt as though I should have been able to stand my ground a bit better against a relatively common enemy in this area. But nonetheless, I was still able to stand my ground and use some wits and get through the fight, knowing when to block and how much health it had left, understanding that counter will truly carry me through this area was super important. Also, the game is kind enough that after going through about 10 floors of ridiculously tough enemies, it had me fight enemies like this guy, where he wasn't really dealing damage, nothing to really be concerned about, and he really didn't have a whole lot of health either, but he did give a lot of experience. And I believe that because this is the last section where you really had a chance to level up your characters, the game was like, okay, just in case you haven't done so and you've been like skipping a bunch of fights or you haven't been able to win a lot of fights, take these easy enemies, level up, beat the game, you know, so on and so forth. So yes, this fight took a ridiculously long time, and a majority of the fights in this game have been sped up so that you guys aren't sitting through, you know, the monotonous of all the back and forth. But I will say that up to this point in the game, I've been playing for about 24 hours, 24 to 25 hours through this gameplay, through the challenge. So at this point, I was thinking, you know, okay, you know, the game is trying to be nice, it's trying to help out, but I've already done all that I can. If I'm not strong enough to beat the game at this point, there's literally nothing left that I can do. I've got the best weapon I can have, I've got the best armor available in the game. There are some things I could switch to maybe have better evasion rather than defense, but at this point it was just really being committed. Now into the final stretch. We're presented with the final boss, and Golbez and Mr. Old Guy are up first. And I'm gonna be honest, I felt like the fact that they only ever really attack with magic, I was like, oh, okay, you know, that's interesting. Like, I just felt like Golbez would have been more of a physical fighter at this point in the game. But they don't really give him a classing, like, you know, Cecil was a Dark Knight and then becomes a Paladin. And they give everyone else like roles and such. I believe that Fusoya is a sage. But really, I'm getting way off topic here. Anyway, the two of them do massive damage to this boss. And I'm thinking, okay, great. He's done. I guess it's time for us to go home, you know. We're a little late to the party. Don't know how they got here so much faster than we did with all those enemies, but it's... Oh. There's a phase 2 to this boss. Okay, well, you know, they just did like a crazy amount of damage. Surely they can do it again and 0. That's gotta be something, I mean. 0. These guys are like massive major, like they're supposed to be like the best of the best. Tella used Meteor and he was out. And these guys have done it and it did nothing. Golbez tries to use a crystal that supposedly is supposed to like amplify the light of the user, but with Golbez being trapped in the dark for so long, he had no light. So it was kind of useless. and they end up getting basically wiped out. Thankfully, Golbez was able to hand that crystal over to us, and we will be able to use that in just a second. With our team being revived by Palamimporum, Tella and Edward are able to give some healing to our team as well. And other people we've met along the way, Yang, I think is how they say it, and Sid, they also give us some healing, and then we get some more help from Fusuya and Golbez. They heal Cecil. Thanks, guys, that's great. But unfortunately, this is a Cecil only challenge, and I will not forget that. So I slowly take all my teammates out, and thankfully this boss is sort of sequence locked. And it's interesting because they wanted you to essentially build up all of your stats like haste and shield and shell and such, so that when you got ready to use the crystal and put him into his next phase, you'd be all like, okay, like we're stacked and we're ready. Well, Zeromus has a move that gets rid of status for everyone. So you're supposed to waste all your magic setting up so that when he entered the fight, he would get rid of it all. And then, you'd be all like, oh no, like, I don't know what to do. But thankfully, this actually isn't the first attempt that I had at the boss. It took me a while. But you're able to, and I said it was the best item in the game. You can hit the final boss with Spider Silk and it affects him. Yes, he will clear it from time to time with Black Hole. But you can still hit him with it, and it gives you more than enough time to deal damage to him. Zeromus has a lot of really heavy hitting moves. He'll hit you with moves that deal, I believe it was no less than like 2,000 damage or something like that. So it was really important that we stay constantly healing. I saved a lot, basically all of my elixirs for this point, because I knew that he also had the move Osmosis, which takes magic. So even if I wanted to heal with my magic, if he took too much of it from me and I ran out, I wouldn't have enough time to either and then heal as well. So an elixir was just the best bet for it. And I made sure that I kept enough Spider Silk down to this point to make sure that I could reapply the effect over and over and over as need be to Zeromus. And I believe I ran through close to 10 of them, maybe even more than that. And as far as elixirs, I probably went through about just as many also. And there was an item called Stardust that would deal 9,999 damage to Zeromus, but it was really, really slow. So I had to choose between hitting Zeromus with a move that would guarantee deal a lot of damage, or just take 2 swings at him. Also, I kept making the mistake of trying to heal myself when I had Reflect, and it would bounce off of me and heal Zeromus. Simple mistakes, but I learned over time, slowly but surely. But again, this is why I made sure that with all of those other fights that I was really struggling with, I kind of reminded myself to save those good items until you felt like you were truly stuck. And I was like, if I'm really stuck and I've got no other options, I'll use some of my better items. But if not, I'll just save them, which was a bit unfortunate for Stardust. I thought I was going to be able to use them a bit more freely. They're still a really great item, but like there were bosses before where I could have used them then, and it would have been so much easier. Like, against the wall. I don't remember how many of the Stardust I had at that point, but it definitely would have made that fight a lot easier, considering that I was dealing about half the damage that Stardust would have done at that point. But as I'm going through the final fight for this challenge, I realized just how long I had been running through all of this. Yes, in terms of gameplay time, it was around 26 hours. But in actuality, I'd taken months of preparation. I'd gone through about half the game, seeing if even that much of it was possible. And then I redid all of that on a stream or over a couple different streams. And it was just like all of this time and energy spent towards getting to the end of this and actually being here and being so close to being finished. I almost lost it. And there were points where I was like, okay, just don't mess up, because if I mess up this fight, I don't know if I'll have the strength or the willpower to come back and actually beat this thing. And then it happened. I saw the white flash, and I realized that that was it. All the pain and the stress and anguish, it was all finally done. Zeromus had been defeated, and the world was saved. I thank you guys for sticking around to this point in the video, the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed, please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm already looking into starting another challenge, and I'll be streaming that over on Twitch. So if you guys want to come and catch that, I'd recommend swinging by from time to time. When I stream, it's really inconsistent, so just hit the little bell so that you'll be notified when I do start streaming, because yeah, it could be at any point in time in the day. But all right, I had fun, and I hope you guys did too.